Welcome back to Yang Daily. Tons of big events happening today. It's so hard to keep up. It's messing up both the podcast release schedule and my sleep schedule because every time I'm about to record, another event pops up. Sorry for the inconsistency. Let's dig in. First, Tulsi Gabbard has officially dropped out of the race today and endorsed Joe Biden. I don't think dropping out will surprise anyone, as she never had a serious delegate count, unfortunately. The endorsement, however, has of course triggered burners who are now giving her the same toxic treatment they gave Yang. Despite that, I'm sure Tulsi made the choice for the same reason she and Yang dropped out themselves. It's disappointing to see that sort of behavior, particularly after all Tulsi has done for Bernie, and Bernie basically turned his back on her the entire race, as he seems to have turned his back on every candidate. I had really hoped that a coalition could be formed early on between Bernie, Yang, and Tulsi, and that they could work together to defeat the rest of the field and get behind whichever one of them had the best chance at the end. But despite Yang being clearly open to sharing his knowledge on the issues he brought to the table with other candidates, only Tulsi and Biden seem to have taken him up on it, and Bernie also declined to adopt UBI when it could have won him Yang's endorsement, so I don't really know what Bernie was thinking. He made no effort to reach out to anyone, and he allowed his surrogates and followers to lash out with toxic attacks against candidates who could have been his allies, alienating everyone who wasn't already with him and even some of the people who were. But I'm getting sidetracked. It's tragic that Tulsi was not given more respect in this race by everyone, as she has some of the same nonpartisan appeal of Yang, and her adoption of UBI makes it clear she's willing to adapt to new information, listen to others, and evolve her positions for the better, which is another thing that she and Yang share. I'm grateful to her for her contribution to the movement, and I hope she will continue to be an integral part of our efforts. Yang, of course, had kind words for Tulsi, saying, quote, "Tulsi Gabbard is a patriot, a warrior, and a champion for reconsidering the role of America's military in the world. She worked on the trail like none other. Tulsi, I hope you and Abraham have some time together. Thank you, Tulsi, for championing UBI stimulus and universal basic income as well. You were one of the first." End quote. We see you, Tulsi. The Trump administration has released their Phase 3 relief plan. It includes cash payments of up to $1,200 for adults and $500 per child. The total checks would start to phase out above $75,000 in adjusted gross income based on 2018 tax returns. People with no federal tax liability would only get $600. As far as I've seen, the payments would be made in April and May, with no plans beyond that. So this is basically what I expected. 1 or 2 time payments, means tested, based on year-old income, which is super screwed up, though the child allowance is a nice addition. This is about as good as could be expected for 2 months. It absolutely should be monthly until the end of the crisis. I don't know if it's better to demand that off the bat or take this and demand follow-ups. It's also only part of a much larger bill, unfortunately. The rest includes extending the tax filing deadline to April 15th or October 15th for corporations, up to $50 billion for airlines, $8 billion for cargo air carriers, $150 billion for other severely distressed businesses and bailouts. It says the government has the right to participate in the gains of any business it lends money to, whatever that means. We're going to garnish their wages until they've paid back the bailout money? I don't know. It puts limits on salaries of CEOs of corporations receiving the bailouts, but no ban on stock buybacks, which of course is where most of the money would go. Small business loans for any company with less than 500 employees, private health plan coverage of testing without cost sharing, and increased funding for community health centers, the potential to suspend federal student loan payments for up to 3 months, and a bunch of other stuff. Pelosi and Schumer's response to the bill was, quote, "It is not at all pro-worker and instead puts corporations way ahead of workers," end quote. Schumer earlier said, quote, "If a package does include direct payments, they need to be bigger, more frequent, and more targeted," end quote. Clearly, they need to be convinced that universal is best, but it doesn't seem that they are necessarily opposed to direct transfers, just to universality. At least that's all I've seen them speak out against directly. However, Schumer has said in a speech on the Senate floor that expanded unemployment benefits would be a more effective way of helping workers with a $1,000 check from Washington, so it seems Schumer at least prefers these crap targeted measures over direct transfers. We need to be messaging, writing, and calling these people daily, giving them the data on the detriments of targeted measures, and demanding they take the clear best option of UBI. This next part's a little bit old, and apparently I missed it, but Brown, Booker, and Bennett, yes, your least favorite boy band ever, the B-Boys, have drafted their own UBI STEM proposal, which is $2,000 per person for the first quarter, continuing until unemployment is back to normal, but reducing by $500 each quarter until bottoming out at $1,000 per person, with benefits being cut in half if unemployment is only half a percentage point above the normal. Yeah, complicated. The problem here is this is so complicated that it's going to be more difficult to pass, more difficult for recipients to understand. The payments being 3 months apart makes budget planning more difficult than a monthly option, and it's pretty much impossible to trust because it's all dependent on unknown provisions that can drastically change the benefit amount. It removes the primary boon of UBI, which is certainty. The certainty of knowing you will have at least so much money coming in on the regular, guaranteed. This plan lacks that. Also, the benefit amount seems to favor children and leave single adults with less than $1,000 a month, which I consider to be the absolute minimum required. Then there's the amount decreasing as the crisis drags on, which doesn't make much sense. Oh, and it's also means tested at $90,000 per adult, so this might be a good time to talk more about that. Means testing has been such a hot topic lately that I've had to develop a single tweet canned response for it, or else I'd spend the rest of my life typing. I figured I should share it with you all and include it in the links so it can save you time too if you want. It reads as follows. Means testing seems like a good idea. Why waste money on those who don't need it? Makes sense. In practice, however, means testing produces bad outcomes. Here's why. Number 1. Means testing takes time, both in execution and in congressional agreement, severely delaying aid in a situation where every day matters. Number 2. Means testing is not free. Tracking everyone's income and special circumstances requires bureaucracy, which takes funds away from the program. Depending on where the cutoff is and how complex the targeting is, the bureaucracy can become more expensive than the savings from denying the wealthy, completely negating the purpose. Number 3. Any large bureaucratic system is going to produce errors that wrongly deny people benefits at a time they cannot afford. The more complex the system, the more points of failure. Number 4. People's income can change quickly, which means you either have to have people reporting income constantly, which becomes a major issue for both recipients and the agency, or end up denying people who are newly in need for some arbitrary amount of time. This is particularly problematic for non-classical workers, such as gig, contract, temp, entrepreneurs, etc., whose income fluctuates widely on circumstances. And obviously, those who lost their job since last reporting. Number 5. Living expenses vary widely by location. Income that counts as rich in one place is scraping by in another, which means either a very complicated location-based benefit system, which would create arbitrary zones and generate a lot of fraud, or excluding people in need, or setting the income cutoff super high, which means the savings for all this are very small. And either way, it adds a ton of hassle and barriers for recipients. Number 6. Studies show that means testing hurts people's approval of government, particularly those near the benefit cutoff line. While those barely receiving benefits are 0.6% more favorable, those just shy are 10.5% less favorable. Nobody likes to be told they're just barely not poor or undeserving of help. That erodes trust in government and support for the program. Number 7. For similar reasons, means testing puts a stigma on recipients. People getting it feel bad for needing help, and those not getting it resent having to pay for other people's benefits. This again erodes support for the program and hurts morale. Number 8. Most importantly, studies have found that, for all the reasons above and more, means testing almost always ends up excluding a ton of people who need it. A staggering 44 to 97% according to global studies. This is part of why less than half those in poverty in the US receive any assistance from our cash grant welfare programs. Better to give to a few people who don't need it than to not give to a lot of people who do. End PSA. Hopefully that'll help you guys as well in responding to the very frequent objection. Moving on, our Canadian brothers and sisters have joined the fight in their own country for $1,500 per adult, $500 per child. They have a petition floating around, and as citizens of the world, we should all sign it. It requires you to enter your Canadian zip code. If any of us Canadians have forgotten our Canadian zip code, as totally happens, a quick Google search can always help you find your Canadian zip code, eh? Canada actually has a sort of UBI for families currently functioning that's working out great, and I should really cover it at some point when there's less of a news deluge. On to some of the biggest news. Yang announced in a video today that Humanity Forward is done waiting for the government and has launched its own COVID relief fund that will funnel at least $1 million into the hands of those most in need. This will come in the form of $250 to $500 grants that can be one-time or recurring, and the first target area will be Bronx, New York, with new initiatives rolling out across the country in the coming weeks. Humanity Forward is also looking for partner organizations who ideally have pre-existing financial relationships with target populations to be able to efficiently identify appropriate recipients and disperse payments, such as credit unions, community banks, and community organizations that work with tipped workers, home healthcare workers, and other classes most affected. They are also looking for volunteers, activists, and other interested parties who are ready to mobilize using available time and talent to promote, assist, and develop an emergency UBI program in a limited amount of time. Volunteers will ideally be local to the targeted communities. In either case, you can sign up on the Humanity Forward website linked below. You can also donate there, with 100% of your donation amount going directly into the hands of those in need. If you are one of those in need of aid, you can also request it there. It's not exactly UBI, but it's what is needed right now. Hopefully, this will grant the organization and the cause way more prominence, but worst case scenario, they just help a lot of people in need. That's a win-win. We have already seen many articles on it. For those in need of aid, you can also try calling United Way at 211, as they are offering financial assistance to some parts of the country. Yang also made a return visit to the Breakfast Club, where he announced the relief fund and talked about the crisis and more, as well as a return visit to Recode Decode. Check them out below. Lastly, Income Movement is starting a new spin-off of the hit My Yang Story movement from the campaign and asking people to record a 30-second clip telling their story of how the pandemic has affected you and how a UBI would help. I think we should call it #MyUBIStory and blow it up even larger than the first time. This is something that might help pull people in from outside the Yang Gang, since it's now about COVID and a much-needed relief package. Let's get on it, Yang Gang. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Send your respects to Tulsi, help Canada get their own UBI, volunteer or donate on the Humanity Forward relief site, contact HF or United Way if you need help, check out Yang's podcasts, bookmark the Universality canned response, add your COVID story, sign the UBI stimulus petition, message Trump, Pelosi, McConnell, and Schumer why true UBI stimulus is the best solution, use ResistBot or Income Movement to easily contact your representatives, and don't forget to Yang Daily.